Hi, this is a quick video about what you need to do when writing a short story, and it's just going to kind of go over a lot of different things that have to go into a really good short story, and so it's just kind of a general mini lesson. In general, you have really two rules for writing a powerful short story. The first one is show, don't tell. And what that means is you don't ever want to say to the reader or to your audience that, so and so in my story went to the store. So and so in my story felt upset. What you want to do instead is show at all times what's going on. So you could have a character that trudged, stubbing her toe and hiding her face as she stumbled into a supermarket. You could have a character that, boldly met the eyes of an accuser as tears streamed down their face. So we don't want to tell people what's going on in our story. We want to show them. You also want to be brief and powerful. So many of the mistakes that I watch students make with their short stories is that they are really wordy and they don't actually want to make them short. They have so many ideas that they're trying to cram into a single story that they don't really get any of those ideas to be super clear. And so it really is in your best interest to be brief and to choose your words extremely carefully. You want every single word that you choose to be exactly the word that you want and that's going to communicate your most powerful message. Which, speaking of message, so let's talk about the theme. And so it's not possible to have a really good short story without a theme. And remember, the theme is your overall message. But what you want to be careful of is you don't want to get too preachy. And what that means is you don't want it to just be a kind of theme that smacks you in the face, something that you are directly saying, or something that you are proving just over and over and over in these really obvious or overt ways. What you want to do is you want to let the theme grow out of the story so that readers actually feel like they've learned it for themselves, or that they came to the conclusion that, these themes that you've embedded in the story, really is something that they've learned. You definitely should not have to directly say, though, what the moral is. So nowhere in your story should it say, and this is why it's always important to put family first, or, and this is why it's extremely essential to always tell the truth, or something to that effect. You really want to show that through some different methods that you can use. So you want to make sure that the theme is obvious by how your characters change. And that's really how you show your theme. It's through the characters' interactions with the setting, with the conflict, and with each other. So how my character handles the conflict in the story might demonstrate a theme, or how they overcome certain things with the setting, or how they show kindness to one another or something. That might be what actually shows what the theme is. So let's really talk quickly about the plot. So the plot is the storyline of your short story. And so what's really important is that as you're putting together your series of events, you want to make sure that your main character wins or loses at least partly on their own, and that they're not just a helpless character that ends up being rescued by someone or something else. Again, most often the character learns or grows as they try to solve their problem, or as they interact with the conflict. Again, what those characters learn is the theme. The conflict really should be the center of your story, and again, that's what's going to build your characters, that's what's going to help you demonstrate your theme, and it should get more and more tense and exciting as the story builds. The tension should reach a high point or a climax near the end of the story, and then kind of ease off. again, one of the biggest mistakes that I see students make is that they spend so much time leading up to the conflict that by the time that they get to the conflict, they are either out of steam and don't really know what to write, or they really lost the interest of their readers. And so my recommendation is to really, really take your time with the conflict and write the conflict first. Draft that out. Spend the most time with the conflict and what you think that most intense moment is going to be, and then you can work backwards from there, because you don't want to rush this conflict. You don't want to rush the most intense part of your story, because that's what's going to actually hook your readers. The other thing to know about a short story is that it is definitely different than a novel. And a novel can have several conflicts, but a short story should only have one. You do not have the time and the space for more than just that one conflict. So you really need to be specific when you're deciding on it. For your story structure, again, you want to jump into the action right at the very beginning. And if you spend time drafting and brainstorming your conflict and that point of highest tension, the climax of your story, if you brainstorm that first, then sometimes that will help you to then work backwards and figure out what had to happen to lead up to that. But at the very, very beginning of your short story, you want to jump straight into the action. Some of the issues that I see students have is that they spend a lot of time describing the character or trying to tell a bunch of backstory about the character, and that's really what certain literary devices are for. So like flashback could tell us, a small story about your character when they were young, which is part of the reason they're having the conflict that they're having in, the present of your story. But you really want to get to the action as fast as possible. You want to embed your descriptions of your characters and your setting and things like that in the actual action. And so we can show you how to do that. And then at the end, you want to wind up your story quickly. Again, the worst thing that you can do as an author is spend a ton of time in your exposition and a ton of time with your resolution and then kind of rush through that conflict. Helping your audience to understand the circumstances your character find themselves in is a matter of artfully including details throughout the story, and again, not in a long introduction. The other thing that you need to do in terms of your story structure is decide about whether or not you are going to write in the present tense or the past tense. Writing in the past tense means that you are writing as if the story has already happened. This is how most stories are written, and I will tell you that it is the easiest to stick with. I feel like many times when I watch students write, they automatically default into past tense, and it's really difficult if they decide they want to write a story in present tense. It's okay either way, but again, if you're writing in the present tense, that means that you're writing as if the story is happening right now, and you need to pick one tense and stick with it. Let's spend a second discussing your characters. So your main character should be someone that readers can feel something in common with, or at least care about to a certain extent. Your main character should definitely be the one that you are spending the most time developing, and so that main character should have at least one flaw or weakness, because perfect characters really are not very interesting because they're not real, they're not relatable. They're also harder to feel something in common with or care about. They definitely also, perfect characters don't have anything to learn, which means you're not going to do a very good job of developing your theme. But just like there should be at least one flaw or one weakness in your main character, there should also be at least one good thing about a quote-unquote bad guy, or something that could be considered positive about an antagonist. And so as you're drafting your characters, you really want to think about that. The other thing that you want to think about when it comes to characters is you want to limit the amount of characters that you're trying to develop in your story. Really, in a short story, there's only time and space to develop somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 to 3 characters. Sometimes you can get away with a couple more, but again, the more characters you add, then the more time you're adding and the more space that you need for being able to really show your audience who those characters are and why they're essential to the story. it is possible to have many minor characters that don't have a lot of speaking parts, or that we don't need to know their background story, or we don't need to know a lot about them. And really, those minor characters often just function so that your main character or characters has somebody to interact with. My advice is always to stick with 1 to 3 characters that you're going to spend time developing. For your setting, you really, really want to make sure that your setting is believable. This doesn't mean that it has to be an actual place, but it needs to feel real. And if it's a place that many of your audience members probably have not visited, then it's really, really good to include lots of details about that setting. Now remember, setting is also more than just place. It's the location, it's the time period, it's the weather, it's the political climate, it's the way that people can, kind of function within a culture. And so there's so many aspects to setting. But the more your audience feels like they understand and can see and feel the setting, the better your story will be. Again, you want to stay away from, direct details. The church was seated in the middle of the town square or whatever. You really want to try and use descriptive details to paint a picture for your audience, and have your characters interact with things so that your audience kind of builds a picture of what all the different aspects of setting are through what they learn about your characters. Again, you want to be incredibly specific about the details you include, and you want to allow the audience to make inferences about different aspects of the setting. That means that you leave some things open to their interpretation. So not everything comes as a direct statement. You would never say, the religion of the people in this town is blank. You would never say, that, I don't know, the time period is a specific time period. There might be a letter that they encounter. Your main character may visit a mosque or a shrine or a church at some point in the story, but you don't directly say those things. And then last but not least, you really are going to want to think as you go through and you're brainstorming and you're writing about the style and the tone that you use. You want to use language that feels right for your story, which means you need to be really careful when you are choosing details and things like that. You want to make sure that it sounds right and that it fits your characters and that it fits your setting and your theme and all those kinds of things. Wherever you can, use actions and speech to let readers know what's happening. Again, I cannot emphasize this enough. You want to show your audience what's going on, not tell them what's going on. Leave it to their imagination. You also want to give speech in direct quotes like, quote unquote, go away, instead of an indirect quote like, she told him to go away. Again, that's another piece of showing, not telling, and we're going to do some mini lessons and things with dialogue that will help you develop that a little bit more. And then the last piece of advice I'm going to give you is to always use the best possible word, one that's the closest to your meaning and that sounds the best and creates the clearest image. If you can't think of the right one, you really want to use a thesaurus or some figurative language to create a picture for your readers. There are lots and lots of narrative techniques that you can use, and again, we'll talk about some of those, but you really want to try and do everything that you can to choose those best words, paint the best picture that you possibly can for your audience, and then leave the rest up to their own imaginations and interpretations. That's it. Again, please don't forget that your 2 rules are to show, not tell, and to be brief and powerful. I can't wait to see what your short stories are all about.